Okay, coaches, welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Chris Oliver from Basketball Immersion and the Basketball Podcast. We are excited to provide this unique access opportunity to a free masterclass. And in our community, we have over 80 of these masterclasses that are on these unique topics, much like what Ben's going to present today. And this one is so good. We have to make sure that everyone has access to it. So, welcome to our very special masterclass with Ben Resner on how can modern positions maximize player development, scouting, and lineup balance. After graduating from Stony Brook University, where Ben played, he spent time with the Cleveland Cavaliers organization, one season as the head coach of the Cape Breton Highlanders in the Canadian NBL, and multiple years in the NBA G League with the Greensboro Swarm, the Fort Wayne Mad Ants, and for the last 2 years with the Rio Grande Valley Vipers. We are really excited to have Ben here. As with all of our master classes, you are welcome to ask questions. You can do this in two ways. You can raise your hand, or you can post a question in the chat. And then at the end, I will open up for questions again, and that's where you will get an opportunity to be able to ask your question in person. But during this presentation, I will ask the questions just so we can keep the flow going. So if you do have any specific questions during the presentation, please don't wait, put them in the chat, and we'll make sure that we get those questions answered. And through Ben's 45-minute plus presentation as well, he'll cover a ton of stuff. So he'll cover much of that anyways and be able to help you out. Without further ado, though, let's welcome Ben. And Ben, thanks for joining us. And we're really excited to be able to hear this presentation on modern positions.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you having me. So Chris kind of did my intro, but I am an assistant coach for the RGV Vipers in the G League. This is a pandemic project, so it's pretty cool for me to share after all the time that's been put into it. I do want to give two quick shout outs. One to Daniel Soto, who was our video guy in RGV. He was a huge help on this with the video and just being a good mind to bounce some of this stuff off. And also Mahmoud Abdel Fattah, who's our head coach, who also helped me poke some holes in it and kind of put it all together. Before we start, you can see my social media and emails in the bottom right corner. Please reach out, any follow-up questions, feedback, or just to connect. Definitely hit me. Don't be shy, and I'll try to get back to anybody and everybody who reaches out. So that being said, the question we're talking about is how can modern positions maximize player development, scouting, and lineup balance? So let's see if I can get my thing going here. Here we go. So how can they? Okay, the first way, I'm going to jump right into it. The first way, they're going to create a shared definition of a way to organize players. I think a lot of people assume, I'm watching TV, I hear people talk, and we all assume that we understand what traditional traditional positions, and when I say traditional positions, I'm obviously referring to 1 through 5, point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, and center. I think we all assume that we understand that definition, but I'm not sure we do, which I'm going to explore as we continue to move forward. But by the end of this, we'll all understand what the modern positions are. Modern positions are going to help you align your skill development process. Okay, so once we understand what the modern positions are, we're going to help create a blueprint for each position. So our staff, your staff, you can all be aligned on what players need to work on. We're going to talk about what traits are necessary to build balanced lineups. Again, once we understand what these modern positions are, it'll help you to see what's necessary to build a successful balanced lineup in modern basketball, and then put it all together to build lineups and rosters. To build on your evaluation skills by identifying player traits. I think that's a big thing for me. Once I put this project together and I had those frameworks on what these positions are, now when I see a player, I can kind of put him in one of these frameworks and understand before I see too much of him, I can understand, okay, this might be some of his strengths, this might be some of his weaknesses or her, and I kind of have an idea where to look before I see too much of them. And then finally, ensure players the modern positions are going to help us ensure that players are being put in the best position to be successful in game situations. And that's really the most important thing, right? I think as coaches, we should all be asking ourselves, how can I put my players in the best position to be successful? And to do that, we have to ask the question on the right, what do my players do well? So I think for that reason, the evaluation is the most underrated aspect of coaching, because if I don't know what my players do well, or I evaluate them and I think they do something well that they don't, then I'm going to put them in positions where they're doing things they maybe shouldn't be doing or aren't their best at. So it's so important that we understand what they do well so we can then put them in position to do so. So the modern positions help us do that because they're all based on their skill set and attributes and what players do well, instead of traditional positions, which are really based on the court. You know, the center is supposed to be near the basket. The point guard is supposed to be at the top, right? And that doesn't tell us what players are doing in the modern game. So like I kind of am alluding to, the game has really evolved, especially the last 5-6 years, to a point where those positions don't actually represent the different attributes and roles of players. So I just want you to think about, before I move forward, how would you define, I talked about the 1 through 5 that we all talk about. How would you define those things? If somebody said, what is a power forward? And you had to write that down, what would that look like? So I was curious because I didn't know my own answer. So I looked it up. I'm not going to read through this, but I do want to give everybody to read through it. This is from the Junior NBA website, obviously part of the NBA family. So these are the official definitions for what we refer to as traditional positions. I know I was shocked when I read this. So take a second, read through all of them and see how it might have lined up. I know I asked you to define power forward. So see how that lines up with what you thought. Just give you about 20 seconds. Okay, so I know for me, I know this is not what I would have written down. Okay, so I think it's pretty clear. If I think it's likely that if I asked anybody, if I polled anybody in this chat, what did you have down for point guard? And then we compared our two answers, they'd probably be different. So if we have two different definitions for what these two things are, then how could we be using them and understanding that we're talking about the same thing? So I think, to me, it's clear that there is no shared definition on what these things are, because I certainly didn't have down what's written here. Okay, so it's so important that we find a shared way to define and organize players. And that's where the modern positions come in. So how do we do that? We do it a few ways. With their attributes, who are they? How athletic are they? What do they do when they're on the court? And how can we develop them? So here they are. Okay, the floor general, high usage guard, elite shooting wing, versatile role player, skilled forward, modern big, traditional center, and offensive engine. Before we dive in on what those are, I do want to talk about, as I mentioned, a bunch of time has gone into this, but by no means is it a finished product. We're always trying to tweak it, always trying to poke holes in it and see where we can improve it. So we're always trying to find ways where we can improve it and drill down even further. These are frameworks. Like with the other positions, there are fringe players, right? You can go back and forth situationally. You can do different things. So there's definitely a fringe. But before we dive in, I just wanted to say that, nothing here is absolute. There's definitely some gray area, and we're always trying to drill down and, eliminate it even further. So let's dive in. The floor generals, where we're going to start. So each position, as we go through, you're going to see in the top right-hand corner is what I'm calling the straight measurement key. Okay, so this is what this position brings to your lineup. So you can see green is going to be excellent, yellow is going to be average, and red is going to be poor. So as we go through the positions, you'll kind of see what this position brings to the floor and brings to your team. The floor general. Okay, these guys are smaller. Again, I want to make sure we set up this first slide so you understand what to expect as we move forward. There's going to be some red numbers under some of the details here. Those red numbers are used to organize our stats statistically, so we could be even more efficient in drilling down and weeding out players and using the NBA stats site to organize the players and put them into these boxes that we're trying to find. So the floor general, these guys are smaller, generally less than 6'5". They're eager playmakers. They're organizers. They run the team. They get the team into their offense. They're not usage, right? I said not used. What is usage rate? I think some people may be familiar with it, but others may not. So I just want to talk about quickly. Usage rate is field goal attempts plus free throw attempts plus turnovers over possessions. So that's something that we're going to refer to a bunch in this project. Just to give you an idea, the LeBrons of the world, the Giannis's, those guys use the highest rate of possession. So again, these are just some stats that we use to kind of articulate and organize the players. But once you guys become more familiar with the modern positions, then you won't even need those stats. And you can see how the modern positions can apply to your team at pretty much at most levels, even without the NBA stats. But so the floor general, not used as often as the high usage guard, but these guys are super efficient. They have a high assist to turnover ratio. These guys really take care of the ball. Like I said, they run the team. They get you into their offense. Okay, some examples. You see Chris Paul on the screen. He is the top tier floor general in my mind. Malcolm Brogdon and Tyus Jones. Okay, we talked about skill set. You're going to see this on every position. So these guys make basic pick and roll reads. They have the ball in their hands. They're capable catch and shoot threats. Okay, most of the time, these guys can knock down open threes. But again, it's not black and white. Sometimes that may not be the case. The example that comes to mind, we talked about Chris Paul. Rajon Rondo falls into the floor general category, right? So he may be a little different. So again, not black and white. There is some gray area. There are some fringes, but Rondo falls into the floor general. But most of the time, these guys are capable catch and shoot threats. They have a high basketball IQ and they promote ball movement. Like I said, they're getting you into their offense. They're getting the ball moving. They're getting to the paint, playing a lot of pick and rolls. They're creating advantages and making good decisions with the ball. They're pesky defenders. A lot of the time, these guys aren't the biggest. These guys aren't the most athletic. So for that reason, they often tend to be pesky defenders. Because of those same limitations athletically, they're limited breaking down individual defenders. You don't want your floor generals at the top of the key isoing for 30 possessions a game. That's not going to be good offense either. And they're below the rim finishers, which again is kind of like what I talked about with their athleticism. So I did put together some videos that correspond to each position. I'm not going to show all of them to you, but here's a little tidbit of it. Hopefully it comes through pretty clear. You can see Chris Paul, he's directing. He's getting the team in their offense. You got Mikal Bridges setting a pin down for Book there. Chris is sorry, I'm just going to let it go. I won't stop it. So hopefully you can see it. Chris Paul is a capable spacer. They play the action. He's patient. The ball does come back to him. The ball's moving. He's promoting ball movement. He drives it. He puts two on the ball, and then they kick it for an open three. He makes a good decision with the basketball. He gets to the paint and makes the right read. Tyus Jones in this next clip, he handles the pressure. These guys are good ball handlers. He organized the team. He gets them into their offense. Ball's going to come back to him here. They're playing this step up. He plays with great pace. He gets to the paint. He makes a good read on the skip. He re-spaces, but he doesn't hold it. These guys aren't guys who he maintains the advantage. He kicks it, and they get a bucket. So again, these guys aren't going to catch and hold. These guys aren't going to pound the ball. They're going to get you in their offense. They're going to keep it moving. Okay, here's the development slide. You're going to see this from every position as we go through. This really, for me, is just a way to organize the development. If we all know what the floor general is, and we can all then say, I'm the head coach, I can take this. We know we have Tyus Jones on our team. We can take this blueprint right here and give it to our whole staff so we can be completely aligned on what the floor general, what Tyus Jones need to work on. So as we go through, you'll see there's going to be 6 categories right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 categories per position. Okay. The one highlighted in yellow is one that's unique to them. Not every position is going to be working on the same things, as you can imagine. So with the floor generals, you have the advanced pick and roll reads. Like I talked about, these guys are playing in a lot of pick and rolls. They have the ball in their hands, so they have to be able to make capable. Shake is a word that what I talk about a throwback pass in the pick and roll, making kicks to the weak side corner, throwing lobs, and handling traps. So again, this is my way that I chose to organize this. You could take this presentation and understand what the floor general is and come up with your own development plan for the floor general. Maybe you choose to do it with 4 categories. Maybe you choose to do it with 2. Whatever you decide to do, this is my lingo here, so it may not all be familiar to you, and that's totally fine. But it's just the idea of this is how we're organizing with the position, the floor general, the type of player they are, their skill set, so then we can all be on the same page with our staff and understand what we need to work on with the floor general. Okay, looking ahead a little bit, I mentioned that this was a pandemic project. I did use some things from the 1920 season because I thought they were good examples of what we were trying to speak to. So this lineup was actually from the 2019-2020 season: Chris Paul, Dennis Schroeder, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Danilo Gallinari, and Steven Adams. You can see this lineup has, from a traditional lens, it has 3 point guards. Now, I think we should all ask ourselves as coaches, are we open-minded enough that we would have played this lineup? Okay, 3 point guards, really, you're not supposed to do that. Point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, center, right? But you could see through the modern positional lens, it makes a lot more sense. Chris Paul, he was the floor general. He was organizing the group. He's facilitating. He's focused on playmaking, which allowed Dennis Schroeder and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to really score the ball and not necessarily, they can also contribute some playmaking, but they're not necessarily worried about organizing the group. And then you have Danilo Gallinari and Steven Adams offsetting each other. Gallinari, a skilled forward, not the best defender, can be offset by Steven Adams' paint presence, and Gallinari's offensive spacing can provide room for Steven Adams to put pressure on the rim offensively. So that group, even though, like we said, it's not traditional with 3 point guards, this was the best lineup in the league in 2019, 2020 with the best net rating. Again, net rating is another NBA stat, just measuring basically success in different lineups and teams. Okay, but this was the best lineup in the league in 2019, 2020. Okay, moving ahead, the high usage guard. These guys are ball dominant. These guys have the ball in their hands a lot, but they're really looking to score. You can see that bullet says they're not looking to facilitate as much as the floor general, but they are secondary playmakers. They get to the paint, but they're really trying to score first. They have a scoring mentality. Again, those red lines, those red stats underneath are really, you could take them to NBA.com and use it, but you could still take the bullets to understand how we're finding the high usage guard, right? And what the high usage guard looks like, right? I'm not posting a video that we showed of the Chris Paul and Tyus Jones earlier, but you could take these bullets to then understand what the high usage guard looks like. So again, if we look up to the trait measurement key here in the top right-hand corner, these guys are bringing average playmaking, they are bringing good spacing, excellent spacing, but limited rebounding and versatility. Okay, some examples, CJ McCollum, Devontae Graham, and Jordan Clarkson. From a skill set perspective, these guys are creative, multi-level scorers. They have the ball in their hands. Like we said, they're looking to score. They're really good with the ball between the legs, crossover, hang dribbles, into shot. They're creating their own shot consistently. They're playing a lot of pick and rolls. They're dynamic. They're getting to, again, a lot of shot attempts out of the pick and roll. They're above average three-point shooters. They're creating threes a lot of the time. A lot of time they're off the bounce. But they do have a big-time ability to get to the paint. On the downside, they have poor shot selection. So sometimes all those things, because these guys are so good with the ball and they can pretty much create their shot when they want to, it leads to poor shot selection. A lot of the time they're contested paint shots, contested non-paint twos, contested threes early in the clock, or whatever the case may be. And they have limited defensive awareness. Because these guys are really focused on scoring, a lot of the time it leads to defensive awareness. So I do want to point out, it seems like the high usage guard is inefficient, and that's not necessarily true. We talked about CJ McCollum. He's pretty efficient over the course of the season, has good numbers, good scoring numbers, so they're not always inefficient. But it does, the high usage guard, probably more than any other position, does show the importance of putting balanced skill sets on the floor. If you put 2 high usage guards on the floor together, like you see in this example from the 2019-2020 Cleveland Cavaliers, these guys are both, what we said about them, they're ball dominant, they're not great defensively, and in this case, these guys are both smaller. So you see their assist numbers there, they really, 1.2 assist turnover ratio and 1.5. So their 2-man lineups really struggled. Again, I'm using net rating as a measurement, but just understand that if you put multiple high usage guards on the floor, who's the one who's going to play off the catch? Who's the one who's going to defend, right? So they're really trying to do the same thing. It's really a redundant skill set. But if you sub in a floor general, you can see Matthew Dellavedova, 3.1 assist to turnover ratio and 8 assists per 30 minutes. That lineup significantly improved with Dellavedova in the place of Darius Garland. So again, it just speaks to the importance of having a balanced lineup and skill sets that complement each other throughout your lineup and throughout your roster. From a development perspective, we talk about these guys are so good with the ball in their hands. So the unique thing about high usage guards is we do allow them to work on situational ISO. These guys are your ISO guys. So you can see in here, I have step backs, pull backs, and pull ups. Okay, so again, this is my terminology. You may be familiar with it, you may not, but it's really not the point. The point is how we're organizing it, how everyone's on the same page with our development, and that everybody knows if we have Jordan Clarkson on the team, this blueprint right here that you could see, these 6 categories with these details, this is what Jordan's working on every day. I will say also, I think Jordan's a really unique case study in this. He's been on traditionally bad teams throughout his career. He's had classic high usage guard numbers. He goes to Utah where they have an ecosystem that is based on playmaking. It's based on efficiency, and he's really the outlier in that system. So it really allows him to flourish and explore that space of shot creation, because they really need it. When their system is bogged down, they need a guy who can go create his own shot. And that's what he's been able to do for them. And it's actually been a really great fit. And honestly, it was something I was pretty surprised about, because a lot of time these guys are, Jordan has been inefficient throughout his career, but it's really been a great fit for him in Utah. So again, it just speaks to the importance of your lineup, your roster, how the skill sets come together, and using the modern positional lens helps you really do so. Moving on, the elite shooting wing. Okay, we talk about the labels and how the modern positional labels can help. So I looked this up on ESPN. Davis Bertans of the Wizards. Okay, they have him labeled as a power forward. Basketball Reference has him labeled as a small forward, and NBA.com has him labeled as a forward. So again, how are we supposed to talk about what this guy does and who he is if we don't even have a shared definition for it? You could see the red underneath why he doesn't fit that mold of what each website tried to put him in. And the best way to describe him is how we describe him, is an elite shooting wing. He's 7th in three-pointers made in the league. So yes, he's 6'10", right? So he's maybe taller. So maybe he doesn't, maybe they would have labeled him a center or a power forward. That's not how he should be labeled. His role and skill set is as an elite shooting wing, and that's how we should be able to all speak about him. So like I said, these guys are bringing spacing. It's the most valuable skill in the game today. Unfortunately, as you can see in the trait measurement key to the top right-hand corner, a lot of the time, all they bring is spacing. Okay, I think the guy on the screen is a great example, again, of how there's fringe, there's areas of gray. Klay Thompson is an elite shooting wing, but he's also versatile. So as you can see, versatility is not highlighted among most elite shooting wings, but Klay's versatility allows that to be offset by somewhere else in that lineup. That's what makes Klay and Steph so good together, is Klay's versatility covers for Steph's inability on the defensive end. Okay, so they're such a great fit. And Klay, I'm going to talk about how these guys make an impact with limited touches, and they're not great off the bounce. That's why him and Steph are so good together. Steph can handle, Klay doesn't need the ball. He can play off him. So their skill sets are really perfect for each other. Okay, so I kind of hit on some of this stuff already. These guys are volume shooters. They're specialists. The way we looked at it on NBA.com was 37% on 6 3-point attempts per 36 minutes. Okay, we talked about these guys are limited off the bounce. Okay, so if we're looking at their numbers, how we're going to find them, these guys have high 3-point attempts and low turnovers. Some examples, we talked about Klay Thompson, we talked about Davis Bertans, and also Duncan Robinson and Buddy Hield, 2 good examples. From a skill set perspective, they have top tier 3-point shooting. And again, these guys are so valuable in today's game because there's such a premium on spacing. These guys are off-ball threats. They have a ton of gravity. For those of you who aren't familiar with the term gravity, it means when they move, people are following them. When they catch the ball, guys are running at them to not let them shoot a 3. So with their gravity, they're able to create shots for everybody else. So they have to be purposeful movers without the ball. On the downside, they're below average handlers, like I said, and they're dependent on the creation of others. But the thing is, like we talked about earlier, the main question that we talked about asking coaches is, it's on us to put our players in the best position to be successful. So I think the elite shooting wing is a great example of that. These guys are dependent on the creation of others. That needs to be us too. We need to recognize that we have to get this guy shots. So how can I get Duncan Robinson shots? Well, we need to put him in actions, we need to call timeout and run plays for him, put these actions into our offense that'll get him looks. That's on us also. So I speak to that a little bit. Here's the development slide for the elite shooting wings. Again, we talk about action shooting. This is the first time we're seeing action shooting. So maybe we're putting flares in our offense. We're trying to get Duncan Robinson some shots. We think flares are a great way to do it. So he's working on flares. He's working on pin downs. He's working on handoffs. He's working on being a screener and hit and chase. He's not a great ball handler. So he can hit and then fly off it instead of ball handling and pick and rolls. Okay. So again, the most important thing is we have to help these guys, right? We have to put into our offense. It's on us. We have to put in our offense. We have to call timeouts. We have to teach everybody how to maximize their skill set because they have their limitations, and that's okay. We don't need to improve. We have to improve their limitations. We don't need to necessarily ignore them. We have to understand what they do well and then try to help them do what they do best consistently. So we talked about that development. Here's some clips. And the thing with the elite shooting wings is these are, at least at the NBA level, not traditional shots. Okay, so is this a shot that you're working on with guys consistently? He slips out of this back screen and flies up the floor off a handoff? Are we working on that shot every day? Davis Bertans, this tough trail three, right? These guys have to be shooting challenging threes that are going to make them even better shooters. This handoff by Kevin Huerter, they go under. He's got to be able to, he stops on the same foot there and raises up. So the thing is here, once we recognize that the elite shooting wings, they don't need to be handling and pick and rolls. They don't need to be posting up. We don't need to be working on that. We need to be getting them even more challenging threes that we can use their gravity and use them in our offense to create shots for everyone else. And again, highlighting things they do well and not necessarily focusing on things that they don't. The versatile role player. Okay, this I want to give a shout out to Chris here. We had our first conversation talking about this, and he pointed out something really important, that everybody we put on the floor, it's really based on their offense. All these positions, floor general, high usage guard, elite shooting wing, skilled forward, everything is really based on what they do offensively. The versatile role player is the one position where they're on the floor because they're such good defenders that we then find their value offensively. So like I just said, these guys are multi-positional defenders. I think some of you will start to recognize where we're going with this. Multi-positional defenders, they're not elite in one offensive area, which is why we have to find value for them. They're good rebounders, they're good cutters, but they're not as good with the ball in their hands as, say, skilled forwards, who we'll get to shortly, or high usage guards, who we talked about, constantly have the ball in their hands and are creating shots for themselves. Okay, they do it to recognize them statistically, good offensive rebounders and a low usage rate. Okay, we talked about usage again. The LeBrons of the world have the highest. Okay, these guys have the lowest. They don't need the ball in their hands. So you can see, if we look up at the trait measurement key, these guys aren't bringing playmaking, right? These guys aren't playing a ton of pick and rolls, getting deep at the rim and kicking out for shooters. What they are bringing is a ton of versatility. As you can see, labeled as excellent, and then spacing and rebounding, they're bringing average. Okay, some examples: Dorian Finney-Smith, PJ Tucker, and excuse me, Bruce Brown. From a skill set perspective, strong defensive tools and awareness. Like we said, this is why they're on the floor. These guys are tough as nails. Off the ball threat, they're active cutters and offensive rebounders. We have to find them value. They have to bring us value on the offensive end because they're not great shooters. They're not great with the ball in their hands. So they have to be cutters. They have to be offensive rebounders. They're capable catch and shoot ability. That is their swing skill. Can these guys stay on the floor? Can they provide enough value offensively? As I've said over and over, can they provide enough value offensively to stay on the floor? So that is their swing skill. Straight line drivers. When they get run off the line, can they be connectors? Can they make the next pass? Which I'm going to talk about more in a second. But they have limited on-ball ability, as I've spoken to, and inconsistent shooting. Okay. But the main thing I just highlighted was the straight line drivers. So when we're talking about the development, we're working on the unique thing with the development here is their passing. Because when Giannis gets to the paint, he kicks to PJ Tucker. Is PJ Tucker, when he gets run off the line, is he able to maintain the advantage and get to the paint? Is he able to get to the paint and then find the next open man in the next man in the system, right? If he catches and holds after Giannis creating an advantage, our advantage is gone, right? So these guys aren't great with the ball, but we need to work on their passing amongst other things, amongst the other categories here. We need to work on their passing to see if these guys can become connectors. They have to be a cog in the system. Okay, the other thing I do want to talk about, Bruce Brown is on the screen. Some of you may be familiar, some of you may not. He played with the Nets this year, and I always heard people calling him a center, right? He's a center, and I couldn't. It was infuriating because I've obviously been working on this project for a long time at this point, and I just came to understand why. I couldn't understand why people refer to him as a center. Is it because he was setting screens? And again, it goes back to, we don't have a shared definition of what these things are, right? He's a small ball center. What does that mean? So I think with the modern positional lens, we can see he's a versatile role player, and the Nets were finding value for him because he was a good defender. Their value with him was as a screener and a role guy. So as we go through this passing, I talked about kickouts, but Bruce Brown this year made a living off the short roll. As you can see here, he was short roll. Teams would put two on the ball. They would trap Kevin Durant, James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Bruce was the screener, and he had to be able to make the next play. Again, so the versatile role player, these guys are not great with the ball in their hands, but we find their value offensively and hope that they can become connectors. They're so important. Despite that, they're so important. You can see here's 5 of the top net rating lineups. I've already spoken to net rating. Here's 5 of the top net rating lineups from this past season. All of them contain at least one versatile role player. And why is that? I think one of the best things about the versatile role player is, as coaches, we all understand that role allocation is so important. what is an individual player's role? Who is at the top of the food chain? Who's the top of the hierarchy, right? Let's talk about the Nets. Kevin Durant's at the top, right? If you have 4 other guys like Kevin Durant, who knows who's shooting, who's doing the dirty work, who's defending, who's blocking out, who's rebounding. So the versatile role player, these guys know they don't need the ball. With the versatile role player, if we have balanced lineups with the modern positional lens, the role allocation takes care of itself, right? Everyone knows what they need to do. If I have a versatile role player, PJ Tucker, he doesn't think he should be handling in 50 pick and rolls. He knows I have to defend, I'm going to space, and I'm going to do the little things to stay on the floor. So those guys are so important for lineup balance and roster building. So important to have versatile role players on your roster. The skilled forward. These guys bring a little bit of everything. We're starting to get into some bigger guys. These guys are taller. They have any combination of shooting, passing, or ball handling skill. They're capable of attacking closeouts. They're utilized in a lot of different actions, more than elite shooting wings or modern bigs. So we talked about elite shooting wings, how they can come off handoffs, but they're limited with the ball in their hands. Skilled forwards, they can still handle. They can come off dribble handoffs and get downhill. They can attack closeouts and get to the paint. Whereas a lot of the time, Duncan Robinson, for example, if he gets run off the line, he's not necessarily driving it to the rim or coming off a pick and roll and handling. These guys are used in a lot of different ways. But they do have a high percentage of their three-pointers assisted, which means unlike high usage guards, these guys aren't creating threes. If they were creating threes, they'd be closer to an engine because of their size and their ability to do so many things. But they don't quite have the athleticism or the elite skill or the elite burst to be an engine. So you can see if we look at the trait measurement key, these guys are super valuable. They bring a lot of different things to the table. Some examples: Pascal Siakam, Michael Porter Jr., and Tobias Harris. From a skill set standpoint, these guys are competent three-point shooters, as I said. They're a threat after a shrink. So once the ball gets to the paint, these guys can shoot it. They can attack the closeout. They can make pull-ups. They can do a lot of different things. They're trusted ball handlers. Sometimes these guys can come off a handoff. Some of these guys handle in pick and roll. Sometimes they handle in transition. Okay, whereas the traditional center, maybe you wouldn't want handling the ball. Okay, they're not engines, right? So what is their drawbacks? They're adequate in ISO, but action dependent. That means we don't mind them playing isolation some of the time. If Tobias Harris is isolating against the Magic on a Tuesday night and they don't have their best guys out there, then maybe he could be successful. But if he's isolating against Bam Adebayo, we probably don't, 30 times a game, that's probably not going to create enough efficient offense for us. So they are action dependent. They do rely on screening a lot of the time, pick and pops, pick and rolls, coming off handoffs, whatever the coming off pin downs, whatever the case may be. They do rely on actions more often than not to create shots for themselves. Limited rebounding and rim protection. Okay, again, you see the red stats on there. They're just so we could kind of distill down the information with statistics and speak to that if we needed to. But limited rebounding and rim protection, these guys need to have a big on the floor with them. Another big, right? Somebody who can protect the rim, somebody who will be on the glass more than these guys do. These guys kind of want to hang out on the perimeter a lot more, whereas we need somebody to play with them who's gonna bang in the paint, who's gonna box, who's gonna defend bigs, and do the dirty work down there. And then insufficient playmaking. We don't rely on these guys to create shots necessarily for others. From a movement perspective, like I said, they're very diverse. They can do a lot of different things. Pick and pops, slipping out. They can come off handoffs, or they could be the one handing off. They could keep the dribble, right? Keepers, you see there. Again, I'm using my lingo. Or they could set screens or come off screens. So these guys are doing a lot of different things. This Nuggets lineup is one example of how important the evaluation is that I spoke to earlier. The evaluation being the most important part of coaching in my mind that's really underrated, and roster building. So this Nuggets lineup, you could see, I'll just speak to 2 high usage guards. Will Barton and Jamal Murray are offset because they're big. Nikola Jokic is their engine, and he's obviously, as we know, one of the best passers in the game, one of the best playmakers in the game. So that offsets this skill set. These 2 skilled forwards, but you can see here, the trait measurement key, they're lacking a little bit versatility. Who in this lineup is going to defend the LeBron James of the world? Who's going to defend the engine on the other team in this lineup? They looked, even though this lineup was successful in 220 minutes, and they saw that they had a hole in it. So what did they do? They looked over to Orlando, and they saw that Aaron Gordon, even though he might have been being used in a different role in Orlando, that he could come over and fit in, his skill set could fit in perfectly with this lineup, right? So if Aaron Gordon's playing off of Jokic, he doesn't need to handle the ball. He doesn't need to create his own shot. What he needs to do is be a cutter. He needs to shoot open threes. And what they really need from him is to defend his butt off. Okay, so you can see we changed the trait measurement key up there. And it's true. This lineup, even though it only played 110 minutes before Jamal Murray got hurt, they were hoping that this lineup, with Barton being 6-man, subbing in with somebody else, they were hoping that this lineup could win them a championship. So Aaron Gordon, you could see, again, his attributes that the attributes that the versatile role player brings lifted the defense extensively. Okay, so Aaron Gordon, again, the evaluation of the Nuggets is huge. The evaluation. What does our guy do well, even with he's in a different team? How could he fit in with the skill sets that we have around here? You could see these clips. Going to go through. Mute this. They outlet in Orlando, right? So we're just going to compare how he played in Orlando to how he played in Denver. Lost my mouse. So here he is. He's handling. He creates a tough, contested step back three. Obviously, I rewinded the video. We'll get another look at it. So he's coming up. He's handling tough, contested step back three. I'm looking at this. If I'm the Nuggets, I'm thinking, no, that's not really what he does. He handled in 20% of his possessions in Orlando were handling and pick and roll. That number went all the way down to 5 with the Denver Nuggets. Okay, so clearly they changed what his role was once he came. And you could see on this clip, maybe he shouldn't be handling in that many pick and rolls. He gets himself into trouble. But here in Denver, you could see him spacing, right? Look at this shot. They're playing 2-man game with Campazzo and Jokic, and now he's able to just play off him. And now he's, as the versatile role player, he's just getting catch and shoot threes. And now we think he can make catch and shoot in rhythm with time and space threes. And he does. The other thing he does, now he's playing off this engine. He's playing off this engine in Jokic, who attracts so much attention as engines do. And with his size, Aaron Gordon's size and athleticism, he can be a great cutter. From the evaluation, we saw that. This guy's so athletic. If we teach him how to play off Jokic, he could be a huge benefit for us. So you can see 2 guys go to Jokic. He gets in the paint. Jokic finds him for a dunk. So you can just see how the player is utilized is so important. And to that end, the evaluation and the players around him, how the skill sets fit together, it's all important. Moving on, the modern big. Okay, the modern big. The big thing with the modern big, you can see in the trait measurement key, I'll highlight it, is their versatility, right? I think we're all kind of, if you're aware about the NBA game today, it's going small. You hear that phrase a lot, going small. The modern big is a fluid athlete. They're able to stretch the floor. They're able to get out on the perimeter. They're able to shoot threes for the most part. They can put it down for a couple dribbles. Okay, so you can see spacing up here also is highlighted. They do have moderate ball handling ability. Like I said, Jaren Jackson, you see on the screen, is a pretty decent ball handler. But the downside is they're not as physically imposing. You see Dwight here, this comparison, right? Dwight is physical. He's huge. These guys are on the glass. Jaren is more mobile than him, right? But not as physical. And again, these guys are playing on the perimeter. So they have a high 3-point field goal attempt percentage, right? And high defensive rebounds. They're decent rebounders defensively, but offensively, they like to play on the perimeter, which is why rebounding is listed as average here. Some examples, Jaren Jackson, Bam Adebayo, and Christian Wood. Okay, the modern big skill set. They have their threat as a roller. Okay, so these guys are still, even though they like to play on the perimeter, they make their living still as screeners. This guy on the screen, he obviously is a unique modern big at this point. If you're familiar with his game, he's become such a good ball handler and playmaker for Miami that he's almost functioning as their engine at this point, their offensive engine, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But for the most part, Jaren Jackson, Christian Wood, Porzingis, these guys are lacking ball handling creativity. They're lacking playmaking, but they're agile screeners. They're athletic. They're mobile, and they can still protect the rim, as you can see here. And they're respectable shooters. You have to honor them in space. Okay, so they're lacking playmaking acumen, lacking ball handling creativity. But again, the biggest thing with the modern big is their agility, and by that I mean basically they're switchable. That's what the game has come to. So I've talked a lot about the traditional position point guard, traditional position labels, right? So Jaren Jackson and Jared Allen would both be called centers, right? In to a lot of people in traditional vernacular, but to us, Jaren Jackson is a modern big. Jared Allen is a traditional center. Jaren 6'11", 240, and a 7'4" wingspan. Jared Allen 6'11", 240, 7'6" wingspan. So clearly they have just about identical skill sets. So they're built exactly the same, which is how the traditional positions are defined, but they're doing two completely different things on the floor. If we look at their stats, Jaren in yellow highlighted, he has more three-point attempts, he's using more possessions, and he's blocking more shots, whereas Jared Allen is a much better rebounder, and he has a better field goal percentage because he's playing more around the rim. Okay, so again, comparing centers, you can see how the modern positional lens really helps identify their role and skill set within the team. From a development standpoint, the modern big, like I said, they're still screening most of the time. Okay, so talking about screening angles, slipping out, flips, pop back. Okay, pop back meaning to me when teams ice, they're popping back, looking for a jump shot and diving to the rim. Again, those specifics I'd be happy to speak to, but it's really not the most important thing. What the most important thing is how we chose to organize this, right, with the 6 categories, so everyone's aligned in what the modern big needs to work on, what each individual player needs to work on. This is a blueprint for you to have as a staff and to share, so we're all on the same page. The traditional center, I've spoken to it a little bit. These guys are almost dinosaurs, right? They're tall, they bring a physical presence, they put pressure on the rim on both ends. They're largely playing in the paint. You can see in the trait measurement key, the rebounding is the thing that they bring an excellent level of, but they really struggle with playmaking. We don't want these guys handling the ball. They're not spacing for the most part, and they're not versatile. If you're familiar with NBA defense, they're almost always in a drop because of their limited mobility. They have to be in a drop. They're not really switchable. The other thing that I get asked a lot is, well, Jonas Valanciunas shoots threes, right? He's a traditional center. Does that make him a modern big? No, it doesn't. Like I said, these guys are trying to stay on the floor. So at this point, most of them are still shooting threes, but sorry, I'm not sure if you guys can hear the train, but these guys are still shooting threes, but they're not mobile enough to be switchable, and that's what's going to keep them on the floor. As I spoke to, the limited defensive versatility, they're better rebounders, but they're not as mobile as modern bigs. Okay, so they get out there, they help you sometimes because of the skill sets of the modern big, Anthony Davis, Jaren Jackson, these guys come to mind. They want to, quote, play the 4. And what that means is play with a traditional center. They don't want to do the banging in the paint. They don't want to box. They don't want to be physical down there. Okay, these guys will do that. Low field goal attempts and high field goal percentage. Again, these guys are largely playing around the rim. They're getting dump offs. They're getting rolls. They're getting pocket passes from everybody else. They're getting tip-ins. Some examples: Andre Drummond, Ivica Zubac, and Jared Allen, who we already spoke about. Their skill set, I've already spoke to a little bit. Their threats as a roller. When these guys are rolling, they cause tags, right? They're lob catchers. A lot of the time, their shots are coming in the paint. Like I just said, dump offs, playing in the dunker. Okay? They're physical screeners. They got to make contact. They have to be physically imposing. They establish rebounding position. They're good rebounders. They carve out space down there and go and dominate the glass. Okay. Their limitations we spoke about: ball handling and passing capacity. We don't want Ivica Zubac handling and pick and roll, right? We don't need him bringing the ball up the floor and trying to organize our offense. Like I said, there's always gray area. Marc Gasol comes to mind. He's a great passer, right? So if you have a great passer as a traditional center, that gives you a luxury to play maybe a high usage guard where Marc Gasol's skill set can cover up for a high usage guard who maybe is not bringing the playmaking that he is. But the hampered agility, as I've harped on here, is the main thing with the traditional center. So you can see a couple clips here. Here's from the playoffs. Chris Paul knows that Zubac right here is going to be in a drop. So he has DeAndre Ayton come and set the pick. And he knows he's not going to switch it. So all Chris Paul needs is a little bit of space. He gets to his spot and he's able to raise up because they don't want to switch Zubac onto him. Next clip. They try to do something different. They put him at the level. Okay, but still, he's still not mobile enough. Donovan Mitchell comes off. He's still not mobile enough. Donovan Mitchell is able to turn the corner and get to the rim. On the contrary, you can see Bam Adebayo, we spoke of, one of the best defensive bigs in the league. He switches. Miami is very comfortable. He's one of the best, obviously, in the running for Defensive Player of the Year. Every year now, he's able to switch onto Colin Sexton, a pretty shifty, pretty dynamic guard. And I just reset the whole thing. So we're going to skip ahead. He's able to switch onto Colin Sexton and contain, right? He contains, and he forces this contested 15-footer. Another clip, he switches again onto Drew Holiday, another pretty dynamic handler, but Miami knows that this guy can switch onto anybody. Sorry, we're messing up here a little bit. Let's get back to this. Okay, here's the rest of this clip. We'll just let it roll. he forces Drew Holiday. He's down in a stance. He's able to sit. He's mobile enough to cut him off, force a change of direction, force that tough contested step back. Okay, so again, that's the difference between modern bigs and traditional centers. The modern big is able to sit down and guard like Bam, guard anybody on the floor, whereas the traditional center is really limited in their versatility. From a development standpoint, the traditional center, they're finishing plays. Like we talked about, they're playing around the rim. So it's a lot of touch shots, playing in the dunker, dump offs from other people, tip ins, but the occasional post up. We still can't have teams switching their floor general onto the traditional center. Our traditional centers need to be able to go down there and bury a floor general and put them in the bucket and get 2 points. So the post up is still important in the right situation. Finally, the offensive engine. Okay, I think we all know who these guys are. LeBron James, they're primary option. These guys are ball dominant. They have an alpha mentality. They have an elite scoring ability, and they have the highest usage rates, as I mentioned earlier. You can find them with high points and high field goal attempts. You can see in the trait measurement key, these guys generally bring everything, right? LeBron James, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Luka Doncic are a couple examples. Excuse me. Their skill set. These guys are 3-level scorers. They're shooting threes, they're playing in the mid-range, and they're getting all the way to the rim. They're creative offensively. These are their highlight guys. These are your step backs. These are your late shot clock, tough contested shots because the ball is going to be in their hands. They have to be creative offensively. They have a ton of gravity. We spoke about gravity earlier. When Giannis has the ball at the top of the key, teams have to shrink, right? Shrink meaning help. Teams come closer to Giannis to prevent him from getting to the paint, which opens up opportunities for others. And because of that, they have to have necessary playmaking. When Giannis gets in the paint and 6 guys run to him, he's got to be able to find the guy in the corner, right? He's got to be able to make the right read. He's got to have the necessary playmaking to not just get himself opportunities, but also his teammates. On the downside, they have fatigue potential. These guys are playing a ton of minutes, a ton of games, and they could, get injured. And for that reason, the downside is their performance heavily influences the outcome. If Giannis doesn't play well, if LeBron doesn't play well, if Luka Doncic doesn't play well, their team's going to lose. From a development standpoint, the advanced passing, right? These guys are seeing defenses that the versatile role player is never going to see. Luka Doncic is getting blitzed in pick and roll. LeBron James is getting doubled in 5 different ways in the post. So they have to know those reads. They have to be able to make those reads in the post. So we know that we need to work on this with them. So in practice, we're putting him in those situations so he can understand where he's looking, where that read is. So when it comes to a game situation, he can make it in real time. How do you become an offensive engine? Okay, here's a couple examples. This is also from the 1920 season, but I think the way it played out is actually perfect for showing how it all comes together. So you can see the requirements. We've talked about them a little bit as we've gone on. 41 games played in 30 minutes basically just means these guys are playing the majority of minutes. You're not an engine if you play 5 minutes, you go 2 for 2, and that's the end of it. These guys are driving winning. Okay, these guys are driving winning at a high level. So 28% usage rate, we talked about earlier, being the highest, 52% effective field goal percentage, and on a playoff team. Like we said, you have to drive winning. If you're on a losing team, anybody can put up numbers, okay? So the high usage guard, D'Angelo Russell, the high usage, right? He had the usage. He did not have the efficiency, and he wasn't on a playoff team. So again, maybe you evaluate D'Angelo Russell and say, if we put better pieces around him, could he become an engine? I'm not sure. But the point is, as usage increases, engines maintain their efficiency, right? Engines maintain their efficiency. So you make your evaluation on D'Lo. This next guy, Devin Booker, okay? Last year, he had the usage rate. He had a 29% usage rate. He was efficient enough, 54.3 effective field goal percentage, but he wasn't on a playoff team. So what the Suns did, they looked at their roster and they said, man, is Devin Booker good enough to be our engine? If we put pieces around him, is he going to be good enough that he drives winning on a consistent basis? And now we can look back at this and know the answer is yes, he can. So if you put a balanced roster around Devin Booker, he has become an engine. And in fact, this year, his stats did line up and he was an engine. Jason Tatum, an upcoming engine. So last year, he had the efficiency. He was on a good team, but he didn't quite make it into the usage rate. So he wasn't using enough of his team's possessions that he was driving winning. But this year, he also did. Okay, so he made the playoffs. He had the usage rate. He had the efficiency. So those two guys, both in a year ago, were trending towards becoming engines and have now since become engines that you can build your team around and be competitive at the highest level. Okay, and then the true offensive engine, Kawhi Leonard, had the usage rate, had the efficiency, and was on a playoff team. So you can see, again, the main point is these guys drive winning, and you could find that by as their usage increases, as players' usage increases to the top tier, 28%, the engines maintain their efficiency regardless of the situation. These guys drive winning, like I said, so you could just see the importance. Not every team has an engine. The Orlando Magic didn't have an offensive engine this year. They didn't have anyone who was efficient enough and using enough possessions to fall into this category. But you can see everybody, every champion from the last 6 years did have somebody. We all know these names. We all know what they're capable of and who they are. So again, that's the importance of finding these guys and building rosters and building lineups around them, to put them in position, put your team in a position to win. So real quick, down the stretch, we're coming here, just talking about putting it all together. So how do we build these lineups? We know the traits that it takes. We know the traits. We spoke about them this whole presentation. Playmaking, an ability to get to the paint and create scoring opportunities for others. Spacing, an ability to stretch defenses out to the three-point line. Rebounding, ability to finish possessions by securing the rebound. And defensive ability to use versatility to limit offensive scores. So we know that this is what it takes to have a successful modern lineup. If we use the traditional positional lens, point guard, shooting guard, what does the point guard, what does the power forward tell you about these things? It doesn't tell you enough. So it's more efficient using the modern positional lens. So we're going to go ahead and do that a little bit. You can see these Suns lineups, they were super balanced. Okay, this was the most used lineup in the league, 706 minutes, and they were 38-14 in games that they played together. So they have a floor general and an engine. So they had the necessary playmaking. They have versatile role players to cover for the floor general who lacked defensive versatility. They had a traditional big to rebound, and they had two versatile role players who were also on the glass. Okay, and they had their engine, of course, who could provide spacing, and everybody in this lineup besides their traditional big who could space the floor. Okay, so they had everything that you need. So this is a balanced lineup right here. On the other hand, you look at the Orlando Magic. I've kind of been hitting on the Orlando Magic here a little bit, but they obviously had a down year. If you look at this from a traditional lens, this lineup could maybe be passable. Cole Anthony, Terrence Ross, Dwayne Bacon at small forward, Vucevic at power forward, and Kem Birch at center. You could see this lineup really struggled. So here we have it as rebounding as the real only strength of this lineup. But, and you could say why? I mean, from the traditional lens, I'm not sure I would necessarily understand that. But from the modern positional lens, you could see they had two high usage guards, Cole Anthony and Dwayne Bacon. They had two traditional centers on the floor. So their versatility is limited. There's no versatile role player in this lineup, right? And where's the playmaking? Two high usage guards, no playmaking. They did have Terrence Ross's shooting, but they're not for spacing, but there's not much spacing elsewhere. Okay, and lastly, the Milwaukee Bucks. Okay, this playoff lineup, this was obviously the Bucks won the championship, and they were very successful with this five, right, in the playoffs. So you can see very successful in the playoffs, 250 minutes, Brook Lopez, Chris Middleton, Giannis, Drew Holiday, and PJ Tucker. But what's the weakness of this lineup? So they were playing the Nets, and that situation called for a super versatile lineup. So what is the option here? They have to make this lineup more versatile. So what can you do? You sub in a versatile role player. They put in Pat Connaughton. They went with these five. Now you have a versatile role player, your engine, and a skilled forward. And now they're able to be versatile enough to switch everything defensively. They have the playmaking with Giannis. They got just enough from these two, right? And just enough rebounding from the group. Okay, so you can see certain situations call for certain things. So they lost Lopez, they lost the paint presence, but they gained versatility and spacing behind the three. So as you can see, certain situations call for certain skill sets, right? That Bucks playoff situation, that lineup was very successful throughout the year. They didn't need to change anything. But once the competition ramped up, they were playing the Nets, they knew they needed to be a little more versatile than they were with Brook because he's a traditional big. He's not as mobile. He couldn't switch. So they need to change the skill set, bring in a versatile role player, and to identify these skill sets and how they're important, how it all comes together. I think it's much more efficient using the modern positional lens. That's it. So if you have any questions, ready to answer them, anything anybody has. If you want to, again, here's my information. If you want to shoot me a follow-up, if you have something that comes to mind later, hopefully you're able to take something from this. And yeah, that's it.
Great stuff, Ben. Thank you for sharing this. And there's already been a number of questions that have been stimulated, and I'm sure we'll have a few more as we go through these questions. So from Piet, first, great analysis and categorizing, Ben. If you had a squad of 12 players, what do you think is the ideal makeup from each category?
Yeah, it's super interesting. I toyed with the idea of actually putting together all the lineups that make sense, but because there's such gray area, like I talked about in the beginning with Rondo and Chris Paul, they're both floor generals, but because they bring such different skill sets, with Rondo's inability to shoot the ball, it's really hard for me to come up with one roster that is more ideal than any other, because you're really just trying to figure out how to balance it all out. If we have Rondo, then we need to build a team with much more spacing around him. Whereas if we have Chris, maybe we can have a versatile role player who's a little bit more limited in the spacing department. So it's hard for me to pinpoint one group of 12 just because of kind of the gray area. You just kind of have to do the evaluation and see what your team needs and what your lineup needs.
Makes sense. From Mark, once you've identified a player as a particular type, what percentage of development do you devote to enhancing their strengths versus their weaknesses? And I guess the follow-up is, will you ever try to make a player into a different type?
Very, very good question. That's actually how this presentation got started. I thought about it from a development perspective, because that's the main question I'm asking when I'm working with a guy is, what does he do well? Which box of these does he fit in, right? Which is why I made those development slides. Which box does he fit in? And then we're going to work on those things. So I don't know that I would put a number on it. For the most part, we're going to work within this framework. I think there's still a human element where if you're working with a versatile role player, you can't just tell him, hey, you're not going to do anything but layups and catch and shoot threes, right? There's still a human element. So we do throw him a bone here and there. So we do let guys go outside of what they do maybe a little bit. But for the most part, I try to stick within those frameworks. That being said, there is occasional crossover, right? Maybe you're skilled forward. Michael Porter Jr., for example, we used him as an example. Michael Porter Jr. is pretty good with the ball. We're trying to expand his game. He's still young enough. Maybe we work on some creating his own threes, right? Some off the bounce creation, some pullbacks, some step backs. I don't have a problem with that. So there is some crossover, which is why, again, there's some gray area on this stuff. Really good question, though. That's something that I've thought about too.
Yeah, definitely. Great stuff. From Quinn, if you determine you have a roster composed mainly of versatile role players, would it make sense to emphasize the defensive end as there are multiple positional defenders? Curious.
Yes, so that's definitely what you have to do. I think actually that does remind me a little bit of our RGV team that we had in the bubble. We had a bunch of versatile role players, a bunch of guys who were really active, really good defensively, had great size, great versatility. So if that's your team's strength, that's what you need to play to. So maybe you're super switchy. Maybe you're really aggressive defensively, trying to force turnovers, because in the half court, they're not as skilled. You're going to get bogged down. So if you have a ton of versatile role players, we're trying to create turnovers. We're trying to get out and play in transition. So we don't have to play offense in the half court. We're trying to create offense off of our defense.
Well, I love the question. And Quinn's second part of that question is obviously how it determines what you do on offense. And, you've covered that a little bit, but obviously in some of these unique situations like this one, how does that impact?
Yeah. So I think, if you have 5 versatile role players on the floor, you're going to be pretty limited in the half court. That's just the truth. So I'm going to go back to kind of what I just said, which is you got to try to stay out of the half court. You got to play fast. We got to run. We got to play early in the clock. We got to try to force turnovers. We got to crash the offensive glass and create second opportunities. But in the half court, if you're playing with 5 versatile role players, it's going to be hard because they're limited off the bounce.
Good stuff. Good stuff. From my favorite New Zealanders, Swoosh Training, how would you sell a player on their role within this system? Which I think comes back to the internal question of all coaches. Yeah,
I think that's an important question. I think that's where the evaluation comes in too. If you're evaluating a guy the right way and you can show them, I've actually shown, I think I mentioned that I had some videos that I put together of these guys and what it looks like and how they're identified them. I sat down with some of our guys this year and showed them, this is kind of what we're seeing of you, what we're expecting of you. And the challenge there, I think, again, is with the versatile role player more than any other, that they don't necessarily want to be put into a box, right? But if you think that's what's going to make them successful and you're confident in your evaluation, then it comes down to their trust in you, right? So then it goes to the relationship side of the coaching. Do they believe in the things you're saying? And then they could buy into the plan. That's really what matters most.
Good stuff. Good
Hopefully
stuff.
that answered that question. If that didn't, I would follow up.
Well, it's hard to answer it specifically, but you did great. Gave a perspective.
Yeah.
Su Chung from South Asia, with players of big stature limited, so basically smaller lineups is what he's saying. What form of development would you suggest to focus on and to fit which modern positions? And this speaks to a question Ben and I talked about at length, which is about youth development and how this impacts that, which I think he'll circle into with this as well.
Okay, so I guess, can you read the first part again? I'm not sure I understood the
Just it's a small team. So by nature in South Asia, they don't have much size. So it's a limited size roster. What form of development would you suggest to focus on and to help them fit into modern positions?
Well, again, I think small doesn't necessarily speak to their skill set, right? So you could have a small who is great with the ball in his hands. You could have a small who's not great with the ball in his hands. So the size isn't really a factor for me. I think the one thing that size does do is obviously you're going to be limited on the glass. So you have to be gang rebounding, and those are more team concepts. So if you're asking what I would do from a development standpoint, it really just depends on what the individual player does well. I think we talked about, Chris, what you're referring to, the youth question, which I'm glad we did cover this because I've been thinking about it since we talked about it. I think the answer is, until their bodies are fully developed, you should be really working on everything. I actually worked with a high school player this summer who was 6'9". He was going to be a junior, I believe, He was 6'9". And what I saw was a modern big. I saw a future modern big. I saw somebody who was mobile, but not mobile enough to be coming off pick and rolls and handling consistently. So I was developing him as a modern big. And I asked myself, am I limiting him by putting him in that box? And I think at that age, the answer is yes. You should really let them kind of explore, let them work on expanding their game. But once they start to really develop physically, once you get to about college age, then you can really start to see these frameworks become much more clear.
Very cool. Chris, maybe if you can type your question again, I'm just not sure what you're asking. So maybe just retype it, because I think I know, but I just want to make sure. Pierre asks, another one is just, have you presented this to higher ups in the NBA? And then what was their impression of this? And because he thinks it's great. Ben, I assume this is why you created it.
You know what? I actually genuinely created it for myself.
Oh,
honestly.
good. Okay.
That's how it was at first. I talked about how it started with the development thing. I wanted to have those development slides where there was a clear blueprint on what we were doing with each positional framework. That's how it started. It obviously expanded into this big project. So I actually haven't shown it to any higher ups in the league. I've talked about it with some friends a little bit, some, a few more than some others, but really not any higher ups. So this is the first time it's kind of seeing the true light of day.
Well, we'll be spreading it now, so don't worry. That's great. Our basketball immersion community and beyond will be sharing this and talking about it. So we're so
Awesome.
grateful you shared it.
Yeah, definitely. Grateful to everybody for coming out.
Well, Mark asked one more question, which is, will you use these definitions as a framework for presenting a scouting report to an opposing team?
Yeah, so it depends on what your position is on the coaching staff. If I had my own team, then I would. This would be something that I implemented amongst our staff and amongst our players. So we all, again, had a shared definition for it, and then we can all use it. But if you don't, then you can't do it, right? Because if I say versatile role player, they're going to look at me like I have 10 heads. So we as a staff could have a discussion. Is this something that we find useful, and should we implement it? And then if it is, great, and we'll implement it. And I do think it would be valuable in that sense. But if that's not always the case. So I would like to implement it as much as possible. I use it in my own life. Like I said, I will rarely at this point use traditional positions when talking about the game in any conversation. So I implement it and would like to as much as possible.
Okay. Chris, thanks for reposting. His question is, what should a high school team do with a lot of guards who handle and shoot, which again would be a common high school situation, I'm imagining. So the team has lots of players below 6'5".
Yeah. So from in the high school game, like I said, I think you should be working on everything. They should be working on all their skills. I think obviously if you have a ton of guards, then you need to be spacing the floor, right? Your advantage is your quickness, hopefully that you could shoot the ball, that you could make plays off the bounce. So in that situation, we're going to space the floor as much as possible. We're going to try to attack the paint and play off each other, drive and kick, play with all the spacing that we created. That's our advantage. It's constantly a question of what is our advantage in this situation. And if your advantage is being small and having a ton of handling and shooting, then you space and you attack and drive and kick and shoot.
Yeah, it's an awesome way to be able to categorize advantage and to be really, even this would direct your offense, your defense, how you're going to work from there. It's awesome in that way. And Coach Sam asked another question about youth players, and she's coaching kind of in that just post-pubescent, so under 14, under 16.
Okay.
And I guess the question mainly is roles can change, obviously, as they develop. And I guess that's what she's wondering most, at what stage is that most likely to happen?
At what stage is that most likely to happen? I think it reminds me of the Aaron Gordon example. I think it depends on the ecosystem around the individual player. What skill sets are around them? If they're getting better, and they're transitioning into more of a role, then that can kind of happen at any point where development is happening. So I'm not sure that I have a clear answer on that. I think it's constantly changing. There's gray area, there's fringe, especially at a young age when development is happening. So it's always a work in progress, I'll say. I think. Again, if that didn't answer, I'd be happy to.
No, that's a great answer, because I think, again, part of doing this, Ben, which is valuable for us and valuable for you, is that now we're going to go think about these things more deeply and then come back with a better understanding. And as you said, it's dependent on more factors than just their position, clearly their stage of development and all those different things that go with that as well. So
yeah.
Coaches, I cannot thank Ben enough. I know many of you have reached out to me privately or personally and just said thank you. Ben, this was tremendous. This was absolutely amazing. Thank you for sharing this in this way, and we're so appreciative. Coaches, I cannot say this enough as well. Please give a shout out to Ben on social media. Reach out to him. Don't be afraid to reach out. Ben loves basketball, and he'll talk about it nonstop, I imagine, right, Ben?
Yeah, for sure.
And especially in feedback for this,
Yes.
which, again, could be the blueprint for all of us in the future of coaching basketball. And I love these questions, and I love this divergent thinking, as many of you know from the podcast and from Basketball Immersion and our master classes. So, hey, Ben, your divergent thinking it fits right in for us. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. And again, thank you for everybody for coming. Please feel free to follow up any questions, reach out just to connect, or any feedback or any follow-ups that you might have.